When my new neighbor bulldozed a 200-year-old oak on my land and claimed I'd signed it over, I thought it was a mistake. Then he sued me, forged my signature, and tried to bury me with bribed officials. He thought I'd back down. Instead, I took his land. And then, I took his house. I never thought moving to the edge of town would put me in the middle of a land war. When I bought my 12-acre property out in Fairfax County, Virginia, I wanted peace, privacy, and a place where I could finally build something that felt like mine. My name's Thomas Wilson. I'm an architect by trade, early 40s, wife, 2 kids, a busted knee from college football, and a firm belief that land boundaries, like beer, should be respected. I left the cutthroat urban life for trees, open skies, and the kind of backyard that made a riding mower feel justified. That land, every inch of it was earned, surveyed, staked, and stamped. The first few months were bliss. I rebuilt the porch myself, replaced the old shed with a proper workshop, and even managed to convince my teenagers to help plant a garden. I knew every turn of the creek that curved around the edge of our property, every stretch of deer path that cut through the woods out back. It was perfect. Then came Craig Bennett. He rolled in one Tuesday afternoon in a jet black Range Rover with dealer plates and a Bluetooth headset stuck to his ear like it was surgically attached. I was elbow deep in mulch, wearing cargo shorts and a Carhartt t-shirt stained with sweat and pine resin. He waved like a senator on campaign trail and introduced himself as my new next-door neighbor. His plot was just east of mine, a big parcel recently cleared for development. I'd heard someone bought it, but I hadn't expected a man in designer loafers and cuffed jeans to be the type building in the woods. "Looking forward to being neighbors," he said, shaking my hand with the grip of a guy who doesn't touch many tools. "There's a lot of opportunity out here." I smiled politely and offered the usual neighborly pleasantries. But even in that first meeting, something didn't sit right. He kept glancing past me, eyeing the terrain like he was measuring it for sale. I wrote it off as me being territorial. But a week later, construction crews started rolling in. Bulldozers, backhoes, dump trucks, all of it. I wasn't worried at first. It's his land. He's got the right to build. But then I noticed something strange. Stakes were going in too close to my west fence line. Much too close. I walked over and asked the foreman about the positioning. He looked confused and said it was all according to the survey provided by Mr. Bennett. I told him I had my own survey from less than a year ago. "State verified," he shrugged. "Not my problem, sir. We're going by the site plan we were given." I went back, pulled out my own survey documents, GPS tagged, verified, signed, notarized. I emailed Craig and let him know that something seemed off and that we might want to double-check the boundary markers before they poured any concrete. I kept it friendly, civil. 2 days passed, no response. Then Craig showed up in person. Smiling like a man selling timeshares, he handed me a double espresso in a paper cup and said, "Let's chat." He claimed his team had used updated topography data and that my original lines might be slightly outdated. He suggested we collaborate to adjust expectations and avoid tension. The guy talked like a press release. Then he dropped this. "Honestly, Tom, you've got more land than you can use. These few acres, they make more sense on my side. But hey, I'll throw in free hardscaping on your driveway. Clean swap." I set the espresso down on the porch rail and told him as calmly as I could that he must have mistaken me for someone spineless. Craig's smile twitched. "You might not realize how things work out here," he said. "I've got friends at the planning board, county zoning. Hell, I played poker with the deputy mayor last Friday. Don't make this harder than it needs to be." I told him I wasn't giving up a square foot. He left without another word. I thought maybe, just maybe, that would be the end of it, that he was bluffing, that he'd move his stakes and build his damn glass box of a mansion on his side of the line. Instead, I came home the following Monday to find his crew tearing down a tree on my land. Not near it, on it. A 200-year-old white oak, one of the oldest on the property. Gone. I walked over in disbelief, and the foreman had the nerve to tell me they were clearing per approved plan. That night I sat on my porch staring into the darkness where that tree used to be. Something changed in me. I'd dealt with difficult clients before, bureaucratic idiots, even backstabbing partners. But this was different. This was my home, my land, and some smug son of a bitch had just declared quiet war. He didn't know it yet, but I was going to make damn sure he regretted it. The morning after the white oak came down, I called the surveyor who handled my purchase last year and asked him to come out ASAP. He arrived 2 days later with 2 assistants, a tripod, and a GPS receiver that looked like something NASA would use to spy on Mars. They walked the perimeter, checked the deed coordinates, double-checked the markers. After a few hours, the lead guy cleared his throat and said, "Tom, I don't know how to sugarcoat this. Someone moved your markers a lot." He wasn't talking about a few feet. He meant acres, roughly 3. He showed me the GPS overlay on his tablet, one outline in solid red, the real boundary, and another in bright neon green, the new boundary. The green outline sliced into my land like a butcher's knife. I took photos, video, everything. I emailed Craig, brief, professional, factual, no emotion. His reply came back within minutes. All changes approved by county planning. Talk to them. County planning. My stomach dropped. The next day I drove to the planning office. The receptionist, a woman whose entire personality was passive-aggressive stapling, looked up my parcel number. Her expression shifted, not quite a smirk, but close. "Oh, that file. Detective Mason will meet you." Detective Mason was actually Arthur Mason, head of permitting and zoning enforcement. Thick neck, pink face, the smell of cigar smoke baked into his jacket. He shook my hand limply, the kind of handshake that says, "I already decided I don't care." "Mr. Wilson," he said, "according to our records, your neighbor Mr. Bennett submitted revised boundary documentation which you signed." "I what?" I nearly choked. Mason rotated the monitor toward me. There it was, a PDF of an agreement stating I approved a boundary adjustment. My name typed at the bottom, an electronic signature that wasn't mine, and the date of signing listed as Cucutello 3 weeks earlier, when I was in North Carolina for a work project. I stared at it, numb. "That's a forgery," Mason shrugged. "Looks valid to me. So investigate it." "Not my jurisdiction, sir." I leaned forward, lowering my voice. "You're telling me a guy hands you an altered map and a forged signature and your response is not my jurisdiction?" He smiled without his eyes. "We don't get involved in neighbor disputes." Neighbor dispute. 3 acres of land ownership fraud, filed through the county, apparently counted as a neighbor dispute. When I left the office, my parking ticket was already printed and tucked under my windshield wiper. That afternoon, as if by cosmic joke, a man in a cheap suit knocked on my door. He introduced himself as a process server and handed me a thick envelope. Craig Bennett was suing me. The list of accusations was laughable. Intentional damage to construction materials, obstruction of commercial development, harassment of contractor personnel, creating a hostile environment for a community improvement project. All of that because I dared to ask him to stay off my land. Attached were 4 separate complaints in different administrative offices, environmental services, building inspection, zoning review, and even a claim that my shed violated community aesthetic standards. There was no HOA here. He invented aesthetic standards. It was a legal blitzkrieg. Dozens of pages, deadlines, fees. Each complaint required a separate response, different forms, different hearings. One man could drown under the paperwork alone. Craig wanted me exhausted. He wanted me broke. He wanted to drag me into so many battles that I'd surrender the land just to get my life back. That night, I didn't sit on the porch. I paced. My wife tried to convince me to ignore him, that no judge would ever let something like this stand. But I'd seen men like Craig before, people who believed that rules only apply to the poor. At 11 o'clock, my phone buzzed with an email notification. From Craig. Subject line, last friendly offer. Inside, sell me the West Strip, I'll drop everything, otherwise this gets uglier. I stared at the screen, pulse hammering. He thought he could bury me. He hadn't met the version of me that grew up with nothing and learned to fight for every inch. If Craig wanted war, I was done playing defense. I hired an attorney the very next morning. I had no idea how much I'd need her, or how much she'd enjoy dismantling people like Craig. Her name was Michelle Grayson. Mid-30s, sharp suit, sharper mind, reputation for treating corrupt developers the way a blender treats produce. She listened to my whole story without interrupting, took notes like a court stenographer, and then said, "He's not trying to win legally. He's trying to exhaust you. Good news, I don't exhaust." She requested every document Craig had filed, the revised survey, the fake agreement, the boundary shift. Then she asked me very casually, "You didn't sign anything digitally? Not even something emailed that you maybe skimmed?" "No," I said. "The only thing I've signed lately is a UPS delivery and a permission slip for my kid's field trip." Michelle nodded once, grimly satisfied. "Then whoever forged this left a trail." Within 24 hours, she got access to the metadata of the forged PDF. It had been generated on a computer registered to Bennett Property Holdings, time-stamped late at night. Idiots always think forgery means copying a signature. They forget digital fingerprints are louder than ink. But the real bomb dropped when Michelle followed the money. She hired a private investigator, a retired detective named Ramirez who looked like he had punched his way through life. Within a week, he traced a series of payments from Craig's LLC to a consulting business called Mason Urban Solutions. The owner? Arthur Mason. Mr. Not My Jurisdiction. Ramirez didn't stop there. He parked outside Craig's construction site every morning, blending in like a vulture on a fence post. He watched, recorded, snapped photos. After 3 days, he struck gold. He overheard a crew lead grousing that Craig fired another contractor for refusing to adjust documentation. Ramirez got it all on audio. Michelle moved like a surgeon. She sent formal evidence preservation notices to the zoning department, to the planning commission, and to Mason personally. Any destruction of records would now be considered obstruction. Craig must have felt the heat, because that weekend his Range Rover rolled down my driveway like a black beetle ready to spit acid. He stepped out wearing sunglasses even though it was cloudy. A bad sign. "Tom," he said with the tone of a man delivering a TED Talk no one asked for, "we need to stop escalating. You're making this bigger than it needs to be." "You forged my signature." He laughed, actually laughed, like this was all a misunderstanding between pals. "I streamlined a process. You're welcome." "You bribed a zoning official." He took off his sunglasses slowly, eyes hard. "Do you have proof? No? Then watch your accusations." "I will. In court." For the first time, I saw a crack in his confidence, a flicker of panic. Then it vanished, replaced by that smug smile. "You're fighting a system you don't understand. The county wants development. I bring jobs and money. You bring tomatoes and nostalgic fantasies of rural privacy." He turned to leave, tossing one last grenade over his shoulder. There is no version of this where you win. I watched his taillights vanish down the gravel road and wondered if I'd just stepped into something I couldn't get out of. The lawsuits, the forged documents, the county official in his pocket. I wasn't battling a neighbor. I was battling a machine. Michelle called that night. Craig filed another complaint. Something about you threatening his workers. He's the one trespassing on my land. He's trying to create a narrative. Unstable homeowner obstructing commercial progress. It's a textbook strategy. But we're not playing defense anymore. What's the plan? We burn down his credibility. Completely. Over the next week, Michelle started gathering the people Craig had steamrolled before me. Ramirez tracked down a family whose backyard mysteriously shrank after Craig accidentally encroached. A restaurant owner who lost parking space because Craig claimed right-of-way. A landscaper who refused to falsify permits and was blacklisted from city contracts overnight. One night we met that landscaper at a diner off Route 17. He looked nervous, hands shaking around his coffee mug. He had me fill out a form saying his retaining wall was within his parcel. It wasn't. When I refused, he told me he'd bury me in paperwork. Next thing I knew, I had an environmental violation, a business inspection, tax audit, all in the same month. Michelle leaned forward. Would you be willing to testify? He swallowed hard, then nodded. I just want somebody to finally nail that son of a bitch. Walking out of that diner, I felt something shift. This wasn't just about my land anymore. Craig had built an entire empire on coercion, bribery, and forged documents. He was a predator, and he'd gotten away with it because no one ever pushed back long enough to expose the whole pattern. Now he had pissed off the wrong man. And I had a lawyer who loved the smell of litigation in the morning. Michelle called it the collective strike. We weren't taking back only my land. We were about to take down Craig Bennett's entire operation. The preliminary hearing was set for a Wednesday morning in the Fairfax County Courthouse, an old red brick building that smelled like paper and boiled coffee. Michelle and I arrived early, her arms full of binders and a tablet loaded with evidence, and me wearing the one suit I didn't hate. The courtroom itself looked like every courtroom you've ever seen on TV, only smaller, sadder, and filled with the unmistakable tension of quiet warfare. Craig sat 2 rows ahead of us, surrounded by 3 attorneys, all tailored within an inch of their lives. He didn't look at me, but his lawyers glanced back often like they were trying to figure out whether I was stupid or dangerous. Probably both in their eyes. Michelle whispered, "They're trying to look calm. That means they're not." The hearing was just procedural, a scheduling formality. But the moment we stepped outside, 2 reporters from local news were waiting, one of them already filming. Apparently someone had tipped them off. Craig, ever the media darling, put on his concerned developer face and said something about community disruption and the tragedy of litigious hostility. I waited my turn, then held up a copy of the forged boundary agreement. "This," I said into the mic, "is what they filed. This is what they told the county was real. That's my signature, except I didn't sign it. He forged it, then used his connections to bury the truth. That's not development. That's theft in a suit and tie." That soundbite ran on the 6 o'clock news. By Friday, a storm was brewing. Craig's attorneys filed another round of motions, 4 in total, to dismiss our claims. They argued that the boundary change had been mutually agreed upon, that Mr. Wilson had ample time to object, that the complaints lacked merit, and that damages were speculative. Michelle shredded each one in her response. She included audio, metadata, tax filings, and statements from other victims. But the most brutal blow came when she filed a motion for your sanctions against Craig for your vexatious litigation, essentially accusing him of abusing the court system to harass and intimidate. We weren't just defending anymore. We were counterattacking. The court consolidated the civil complaints, ruling that they stemmed from the same source, Craig's fraudulent behavior. That meant one trial, one jury, one chance to end this. Meanwhile, Ramirez's investigation into the county officials bore more fruit. We discovered that Arthur Mason had not only approved Craig's forged documents, but had also fast-tracked permits for other projects Bennett Properties had submitted over the past 5 years. Emails, meeting logs, wire transfers labeled consulting retainer. We compiled it all. Michelle drafted a formal complaint and submitted it to the state attorney general's office. We didn't just want Craig's head anymore. We wanted the whole rotten tree chopped down. It was around then that Craig made his next move. At exactly 7:31 on a Tuesday morning, I was woken up by a knock on my door. 2 officers stood there holding a warrant. Apparently, Craig had accused me of threatening his construction crew with a firearm. I don't own a firearm, and I'd been out of town that weekend with my wife, a fact backed by receipts, GPS data, and, embarrassingly, our hotel's surveillance footage showing me trying to carry 6 boxes of donuts into the lobby and tripping over a planter. The officers were polite but annoyed. I was polite but livid. Another false report, another paper cut to the soul. Michelle filed for injunctive relief, demanding Craig cease all harassment tactics. The judge, a new one thankfully, not the Mason-connected crony Zoatzkura, granted it. Things escalated again when the Com State Ethics Board announced a preliminary inquiry into Mason's role. They scheduled depositions. That's when officials started flipping. First came Marcia, a junior clerk at zoning. She admitted that Mason ordered her to adjust parcel maps for efficiency. She handed over copies of the old maps, the real ones, and confirmed that they matched my survey exactly. Then came an anonymous tip. A local contractor claimed that Craig had paid a planning commissioner to delay hearings on rival developers. Michelle's eyes lit up like it was Christmas morning. We subpoenaed phone records and financials. The pattern was there. Meetings, payments, approvals, all too neat to be coincidence. Now the trial date was locked. 1 trial, 2 weeks, multiple plaintiffs, a developer with a god complex, a crooked official, and a stack of forged documents taller than my damn shed. Michelle worked 12-hour days. Ramirez hired a second investigator. I handled the media, spoke to every person Craig had bullied, lied to, or steamrolled. Some were scared. Most were angry. All were ready to talk. We were building more than a case. We were building an army. The courtroom was standing room only. By the time the trial officially began, it wasn't just about land anymore. It was about corruption, about power, and about the arrogant bastard who thought he could rewrite property lines like they were pencil marks. Craig sat at the defense table in a tailored Navy suit, flanked by lawyers who looked like they charged by the syllable. He still had that smug, unbothered aura, but it was cracking. You could see it in the way he fidgeted with his cufflinks, in the twitch at the corner of his jaw when he saw me walk in with Michelle and Ramirez. Our side had a hell of a lineup. Michelle, composed as ever, opened with a blistering statement. This case is not about a neighborly dispute. It is about fraud, forgery, corruption, and the deliberate misuse of government authority to commit theft on a scale that would make most white-collar criminals blush. Then came the witnesses. First, a geospatial expert from Virginia Tech laid out the land boundaries with high-resolution overlays, GPS surveys, and drone footage that left zero ambiguity. He confirmed, under oath, that Craig's construction crew had built nearly 3 acres into my legally recorded property, despite clear, unambiguous boundaries. Then came the clerk, Marcia, looking like she hadn't slept in weeks. Her voice trembled as she described how Arthur Mason ordered her to alter the parcel database, how she had tried to resist but was warned that her job was at risk. She provided backup files, backdated logs, emails with subject lines like urgent, push through Bennett file by Friday. Every one of them was projected on a giant screen behind her. Craig's lawyers objected, of course. They objected to everything: the tone, the timing, the fonts. Michelle shut them down, calmly and mercilessly. She had receipts for everything, literally and figuratively. And then came the tapes. Ramirez had collected over a dozen hours of recordings. Workers complaining about Craig's demands to just bulldoze it. A contractor swearing that Craig told him, "Nobody will notice if you move the markers a few feet." And best of all, Craig himself, drunkenly bragging at a charity gala about redrawing lines with a signature and a bottle of whiskey. The jury listened in stunned silence. Even the judge, now a no-nonsense former federal prosecutor named Hannah Rebecca Lowell, leaned forward slightly. When it was Craig's turn to take the stand, his lawyers hesitated. But he insisted. Of course he did. He walked up like he was auditioning for a political campaign. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "this has all been blown out of proportion. I've spent my life building things, jobs, homes, communities. I never intended to harm Mr. Wilson. If a mistake was made, it was procedural, administrative, not malicious." Michelle let him hang himself for 5 straight minutes. Then she rose for cross-examination. She dismantled him like an IKEA shelf with no screws. "Mr. Bennett, were you aware that the survey you submitted contained coordinates matching the internal blueprints of your own architectural drafts months prior?" I don't recall." "You don't recall fabricating a boundary to match your construction site?" "I didn't fabricate anything." She clicked her remote. On the screen appeared a document titled Revised West Property Plan, BPH Internal Use Only, dated 3 months before Craig submitted the forged survey. It included my acreage marked in red. "You submitted this as proof of an existing agreement with Mr. Wilson?" "Yes." "Did Mr. Wilson sign it?" "Well, yes, electronically." "And how do you explain that the digital signature was traced back to your executive assistant's laptop at 2:04 a.m. on a Sunday?" His silence said everything. Michelle moved in for the kill. "Mr. Bennett, did you pay Arthur Mason for assistance in rezoning and boundary adjustment?" "That was a consulting fee." "Do you typically pay consulting fees in the exact amount of county permit application costs within 24 hours of approvals?" "Objection!" one of Craig's lawyers shouted. Overruled. "Mr. Bennett, did you or did you not attempt to silence Mr. Wilson through fabricated police reports, retaliatory lawsuits, and forged community complaints?" Craig, cornered, snapped. "I was protecting my investment. He was standing in the way of progress." Progress. That was the moment everything turned. The judge called a recess. When we returned, the prosecutor had filed a motion to open a criminal fraud investigation against Craig Bennett, Arthur Mason, and 2 other officials in the zoning department. By the end of the trial, the jury had heard from 10 different witnesses and reviewed on over 100 pieces of evidence, and watched a man with millions unravel like a wet napkin. Their verdict? Guilty of fraudulent land encroachment. Guilty of forgery and submission of false documents. Liable for damages, including full restitution of the 3 acres, and when most satisfying of all, full transfer of the house. Craig built illegally onto my property, now awarded to me as part of the judgment. Craig's jaw physically dropped when he heard that last part. The judge then turned her attention to the county officials. Arthur Mason, removed from his position, fined and referred for criminal prosecution. The planning commissioner? Same. Craig's attorneys tried to spin it, appeal, delay, blame junior staff. It didn't matter. I walked out of that courtroom with my land, my name cleared, and the keys to a house I didn't build but now legally owned. Michelle looked at me and grinned. So, you want to flip it? Or burn it down and plant tomatoes? I smiled. Let's see how petty I feel next week. The day after the verdict, my land felt different. Not just because I had it back, not just because I now legally owned a modern glass-fronted monstrosity of a house that sat smugly atop stolen ground like a failed Bond villain lair. No, it was the silence. For the first time in nearly a year, there were no bulldozers, no men in hard hats pretending they didn't see my no trespassing signs, no knockoff Range Rover idling at the edge of my driveway like a threat. Just silence, birdsong, and a cold beer sweating in my palm as I stood on my porch and stared at Craig's former pride and joy. He hadn't taken the loss well. The last I heard, he'd tried to board a flight to Costa Rica and was stopped at Dulles. Apparently, the state prosecutor had expedited charges. Fraud, perjury, conspiracy, wire fraud. That one stung especially, considering the email trail we'd handed them on a silver USB stick. As for Arthur Mason, he was reportedly in early retirement, which is legal speak for cooperating with the investigation in exchange for not dying in prison. 2 other zoning staffers had resigned before charges were even filed. One of them tried to delete his work laptop. Ramirez recovered the drive. Sloppy men attract sloppy men. Michelle told me over lunch that the county board had called an emergency session to discuss reforming permit review protocols. They even tried to contact me to speak at the session. I declined. I'd had enough of microphones and official apologies. I didn't want a plaque or a headline. I just wanted my life back. That weekend, I took a slow walk across the boundary line, the real one, and opened the gate to Craig's former home. It was fully furnished, of course, minimalist, cold, chrome appliances, no soul. The kind of place that looks good in real estate photos but makes you feel like you're being surveilled. But it was mine now. I stood in the center of the living room staring at a modern fireplace that had never seen a log and tried to decide what the hell I was going to do with it. Sell it? Too easy. Turn it into a guest house? Maybe. Burn it down and salt the earth? Tempting. Then I had an idea. One of the neighbors, a retired Navy medic named Vince, had dropped by earlier in the week with a casserole and a suggestion. You know what would really piss him off? He said with a grin. Use it for something good, something he'd hate. That night I made some calls. Over the next few weeks I quietly started transforming the house. I reached out to a few nonprofit groups, housing support for displaced veterans, local community resource centers, even a legal clinic that helped victims of property scams. Word spread fast, and before long I had a partnership offer. They'd fund the operations if I offered the space. So I did. We converted Craig's Temple of Ego into a multi-purpose community hub. The garage became a pro bono law office. Guess who agreed to volunteer there once a month? Michelle. The guest bedrooms were reconfigured into temporary housing for displaced families. The patio, community garden beds, tomatoes mostly. I didn't tell anyone at first. I let the signs go up quietly. No press release, no news cameras. But it didn't take long for word to get out. Some folks dropped by with donations. Some came just to shake my hand. A few, including 2 of Craig's former employees, stopped by just to say, thank you. I didn't expect any of it. One afternoon, while digging out an old irrigation line behind the guest house, I found one of Craig's original construction stakes. The kind he'd driven deep into my soil back when he thought no one would stop him. I stood there holding it for a long moment. Then I planted it in the community garden right in the middle of the tomato patch. On it I hung a little wooden sign. The Seed of Justice. It made me laugh harder than I had in months. It's been a year since the trial ended. The land is quiet again, not the tense powder keg kind of quiet that used to hang in the air when Craig was still skulking around in designer boots and legal threats. This is a peaceful quiet, a lived-in quiet, my kind of quiet. The tomatoes are doing well this year. I spend most mornings on the porch with a mug of coffee watching the sun creep up over the ridge just past the property line. The real property line. It still gives me a weird sense of satisfaction knowing that I once had to defend 3 acres of dirt and pine trees with the fury of a cornered animal. Now that same stretch of land hums with life. Kids playing in the grass, volunteers hauling compost, someone tuning a busted guitar on the old patio. The Bennett House, as some people jokingly call it, is now officially operated by the Wilson Foundation for Land Justice. Not my idea, by the way. That was Michelle's doing. She even convinced the county to support a grant program for residents facing land use fraud, using our case as the flagship example. Apparently, law students study our trial now. There's even a podcast about it. Episode 6 is called Forged Signatures and Tomato Vengeance. Fitting. As for Craig, last I heard, he took a plea deal. 18 months in a white-collar facility and a lifetime ban from real estate development in Virginia. His mugshot made the rounds online. Something about the orange jumpsuit made him look smaller. Like the facade had finally cracked all the way through and there was nothing underneath but some angry little man who couldn't bully his way out of a courtroom. Sometimes I wonder if he watches the news. If he saw the photo of his old house being used to host a free legal aid clinic for single mothers. If he recognizes the mural someone painted on the east wall. A giant tomato plant wrapping around a surveyor's stake like ivy. Probably not. He never struck me as someone who could appreciate symbolism. The local community has embraced the place more than I expected. We host weekend farmers markets now. Kids from the high school come paint the fences. There's a rotating group of volunteers who teach everything from basic law literacy to raised bed gardening. And every fall we hold a little celebration we call Boundary Day. People bring food. We set up folding tables. There's music, dancing, beer if you're discreet about it, and one very ugly trophy awarded to the year's worst land dispute story. The winner gets a golden stake mounted on a wooden base with the words, "Nice try, Craig," engraved across the front. It always gets a laugh. Michelle gave a speech at last year's Boundary Day. She ended with this: "Justice isn't just what happens in courtrooms. Sometimes it's a community garden. Sometimes it's holding your ground. And sometimes it's a tomato plant where someone once tried to steal everything." She got a standing ovation. Me? I just stood in the back holding a paper plate of cornbread and chili watching my kids run around like they owned the place. And maybe in a way they do. Not the land, technically. That's still in my name. But the story, the lesson, the space carved out from one man's greed and turned into something worth protecting. That belongs to them now. The land was always mine. But now, it's ours.